The shot that missed Violet Prescott's head by a mere inch splintered the wooden beam behind her. The sound of it, that sharp, cracking report, pierced the morning air of Meadow Springs, Colorado, like a knife. It was 1876, and Violet had just become the most unwelcome person in town. "Next time I won't miss," shouted Gerald Whittaker, the bank manager, his face flushed with rage as he lowered his smoking pistol. "You Prescotts have brought nothing but trouble since the day your father set foot in this town." Violet's hands trembled as she gathered her skirts and fled down the dusty Main Street, her worn leather boots kicking up clouds that matched the color of her tear-filled eyes. 22 years old, and already she carried the weight of her family's sins on her narrow shoulders. Her father, dead 6 months from consumption, had left behind nothing but debts, broken promises, and a reputation that clung to her like a shadow. She didn't stop running until she reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open plains and the distant, purple-hazed mountains. Her lungs burned and her side ached, but the pain was nothing compared to the humiliation. They had called her father a swindler, a cheat, and now they said the same of her. "Miss, you all right there?" The voice came from behind her, deep and steady. Violet whirled around, wiping hastily at her tear-streaked face. A man sat atop a chestnut quarter horse, silhouetted against the morning sun. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, and the dust of the trail clung to his denim and leather. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice breaking. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, and as he stepped closer, Violet could see him clearly for the first time. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. He couldn't have been more than 27, but there was something in those eyes that spoke of miles traveled and hardships endured. "Folks don't usually run like that unless there's trouble," he said, offering her a clean handkerchief. "Name's Matthew Grayson." Violet hesitated before taking the handkerchief. Violet Prescott. His eyes registered no recognition at her name, and the relief that flooded through her was immediate. Here was someone who didn't know her family's shame. "Heading somewhere in particular, Miss Prescott?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. "Away," she answered simply. "Just away from here." Matthew Grayson studied her for a moment, taking in her disheveled appearance, the small bag clutched in her white-knuckled grip, and the desperation that radiated from her like heat from a fire. "I've got a ranch about 20 miles west of here," he said after a moment. "Passing through on my way back from selling some cattle. If you need a place to catch your breath, you're welcome to ride along." Violet's instinct was to refuse to run farther and faster until she could outpace her family's legacy. But where would she go? She had no money, no friends, and the next town was days away on foot. "I would only be a burden," she said softly, voicing the words she'd heard so often. "That's what they all say." Something flickered in Matthew's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or understanding. He reached for his horse's reins, adjusting them before responding. "They call me a burden," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them, years of accumulated hurt breaking through the dam of her composure. The cowboy's response came without hesitation, as natural as breathing. "Then let me carry you forever." The words hung in the air between them, startling in their simple sincerity. Matthew looked almost surprised himself, as if the depth of his offer had caught him off guard. "You don't know me," Violet whispered. "No," he agreed, "but I know what it's like to need a second chance." He gestured to his horse. "Come on, we should put some distance between you and whatever trouble's back there." In that moment, with the wind carrying the distant shouts from town and the sun beating down on her unprotected head, Violet made her choice. She took Matthew's offered hand and let him help her onto the horse. "I can't pay you," she warned as he swung up behind her, his chest warm against her back. "Wasn't asking for payment," he replied, clicking his tongue to urge the horse forward. "Sometimes folks just need a helping hand." As they rode away from Meadow Springs, Violet felt something unfamiliar stir within her chest, something that might, if given time and care, grow into hope. The sun had climbed high overhead by the time they stopped to rest. Matthew dismounted first, then reached up to help Violet down. Her legs were stiff from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, and she stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. "Sorry," she murmured, steadying herself against the horse's flank. "I'm not much of a rider." "No need to apologize," Matthew replied, leading the horse to a small stream that cut through the prairie. Most folks who grow up in town don't have much cause to ride. Violet watched as he removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. He knelt by the stream, splashing water on his face before offering his canteen to her. "Thank you," she said, taking a careful sip. The water was cool and sweet, easing the dryness in her throat. "For everything, I mean, not just the water." Matthew nodded, replacing his hat. "You want to tell me what happened back there, why a man was shooting at you?" Violet stiffened, her fingers tightening around the canteen. "How did you know it was a man?" "Saw him from a distance," Matthew admitted. "Was heading into town when I spotted the commotion. Figured it wasn't my business until I saw you running like the devil himself was after you." She handed the canteen back, weighing how much to tell this stranger who had shown her unexpected kindness. "My father died owing money to half the town," she finally said. "He wasn't always honest in his dealings. And they're holding you responsible." "I'm all that's left to blame," Violet replied, her voice steady despite the injustice of it. "I tried to make it right, worked at the hotel, tried to pay back what he owed. But then Mr. Whittaker, he runs the bank, claimed I'd stolen money from the safe." "Did you?" The question was direct, without accusation, but it stung nonetheless. "No," she said firmly. "I've never stolen anything in my life, but my father, he had a reputation, and now so do I." Matthew was quiet for a moment, studying her face as if searching for deceit. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him. "Well," he said at last, "seems to me like Meadow Springs might not be the best place for you anymore." A hollow laugh escaped her. "That's one way of putting it." "My ranch isn't much," Matthew continued, "but it's peaceful. Got a spare room you can use until you figure out your next move." Violet hesitated. The offer was generous, too generous perhaps, from a man she'd just met. "Why would you help me like this?" Matthew's expression grew distant, his eyes fixed on something beyond the horizon. 6 years ago, I was riding with the wrong crowd, made some mistakes. A rancher named Howard took a chance on me when nobody else would, gave me work, taught me the trade. When he died, he left me the place." He looked back at Violet. Sometimes all a person needs is someone willing to believe in them. The simple honesty in his words moved her deeply. "I'm not sure I deserve that kind of faith." "That's not for me to judge," Matthew replied, adjusting his saddle. "Way I see it, everybody deserves a chance to prove themselves." They remounted and continued westward, the landscape gradually changing as they rode. The flat prairie gave way to rolling hills dotted with cottonwoods and scrub oak. Cattle grazed in the distance, black dots against the golden-green grass. "That's some of my herd," Matthew explained, pointing. "Not as many as I'd like, but I'm building it up slow and steady." Violet tried to imagine what it would be like to own something so substantial, to have roots and purpose. All her life had been spent in the shadow of her father's schemes, moving whenever his creditors grew too persistent, never staying long enough to form attachments. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Matthew glanced at her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Wait until you see the sunsets, like God himself took a paintbrush to the sky." As they crested a hill, Violet caught her first glimpse of Matthew's ranch. It wasn't grand by any means, a modest 2-story house with a wide porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings arranged in a rough semicircle. A corral stood empty near the barn, and smoke rose from the chimney of what appeared to be a bunkhouse. "Home," Matthew said simply, urging his horse down the slope. As they approached, a figure emerged from the barn, a tall, lanky man with a shock of red hair visible beneath his hat. He raised a hand in greeting. "That's Pete," Matthew explained. "Foreman and the closest thing I've got to family these days. He and his wife, Sarah, live in the bunkhouse. She helps with the cooking and such." "Will they mind?" Violet asked anxiously. "My being here, I mean." "Pete's a good judge of character," Matthew replied. "And Sarah's always saying I need more company than just cows and cowboys." They were close enough now that Violet could see the curiosity on Pete's weathered face as he registered her presence. "Boss," he called as they rode into the yard, "didn't expect you back so soon, or with company." Matthew dismounted and helped Violet down before addressing his foreman. "Pete, this is Miss Violet Prescott. She'll be staying with us for a while." If Pete was surprised, he hid it well. He tipped his hat to Violet. "Madam, welcome to Grayson Ranch." Thank you, Violet replied, suddenly conscious of her dusty dress and tangled hair. Miss Prescott had some trouble in town, Matthew explained, his tone making it clear that the subject wasn't open for discussion. Where's Sarah? In the house, getting supper started, Pete answered, taking the reins of Matthew's horse. She'll be pleased to have another woman around. As if on cue, the front door of the main house opened, and a plump, cheerful-looking woman stepped onto the porch. Her eyes widened at the sight of Violet. Matthew Grayson, she called, wiping her hands on her apron. You bring a young lady all this way and don't even send word ahead, Matthew grinned. Wasn't exactly planned, Sarah. This is Miss Prescott. Sarah hurried down the steps, her face alight with welcome. Land's sakes, you must be exhausted. Come in, come in. I'll heat some water for a bath and we'll find you something clean to wear. Before Violet could protest, she found herself swept into the house by Sarah's motherly enthusiasm. The interior was simple but comfortable, polished wooden floors, sturdy furniture, and windows that let in the afternoon light. It smelled of baking bread and the pine logs burning in the hearth. Matthew's room is upstairs at the end of the hall, Sarah explained, leading Violet to a smaller bedroom on the ground floor. This was Howard's study, but we can make it up proper for you. The men don't come in the main house much, so you'll have your privacy. Violet stood in the center of the room, overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. I don't know how to thank you all. Sarah patted her arm. No need for that. Any friend of Matthew's is welcome here. She eyed Violet speculatively. Though I must say, he's never brought a young lady home before. Oh, we're not, Violet began, her cheeks warming. That is, we just met today. He was helping me. Sarah's expression softened. That sounds like our Matthew, always picking up strays, horses, dogs, people who need a hand. Now you sit and rest while I get that bath ready. Left alone, Violet sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind racing. She had begun the day facing the barrel of a gun and the hatred of an entire town. Now she found herself in a strange house, surrounded by people who seemed to accept her presence without question. It was too much to process. Outside the window, she could see Matthew in conversation with Pete, both men glancing occasionally toward the house. What was he telling his foreman? The truth about her father, about the accusations against her. Violet's stomach clenched at the thought. These people had welcomed her based on Matthew's word alone. How would they look at her if they knew the whole story? Sarah returned with clean towels and a simple dress. It might be a bit large, she apologized, but it'll do until we can wash your things. It's perfect, Violet assured her, touched by the woman's thoughtfulness. I can't tell you what this means to me. Well, you can tell me over supper, Sarah replied with a warm smile. The bath will be ready in the kitchen in about 15 minutes. Take your time, no one will disturb you. When Sarah had gone, Violet sat for a long moment, her small bag clutched in her lap. Inside were the few possessions she'd managed to grab during her hasty departure: a hairbrush, a change of undergarments, her mother's locket, and a small amount of money she'd saved from her work at the hotel. It wasn't much to show for 22 years of life. The bath, when she finally sank into it, was gloriously warm. Sarah had set up a wooden tub behind a screen in the kitchen, affording Violet privacy while the older woman bustled about preparing the evening meal. The soap smelled of lavender, and for the first time since her father's death, Violet felt the tension begin to ease from her shoulders. How long have you known Matthew? She asked, raising her voice slightly to be heard over the sound of chopping. Going on 5 years now, Sarah replied. Pete and I came with the ranch when Howard passed. Matthew was just a boy then, really, for all that he was 22, had to grow up fast. He mentioned that Howard gave him a second chance. Sarah's chopping paused briefly. That's Matthew's story to tell if he wants to. But I will say this, there's not a more honest, hardworking man in the territory now, whatever he might have been before. The words were both reassurance and warning. Sarah was telling her that Matthew's past was his own business, but also that he had proven himself worthy of trust. The message was clear: Matthew would be given the benefit of the doubt in this household, always. I understand, Violet said softly. By the time she emerged from behind the screen, dressed in Sarah's borrowed gown, the kitchen was filled with the savory aroma of beef stew. Matthew and Pete had come in, and both men rose when she entered the dining room. Miss Prescott, Matthew said, pulling out a chair for her, you look rested. "Please call me Violet," she replied, settling into the offered seat. "And yes, thank you, I feel much better." Supper was a surprisingly comfortable affair. Pete regaled them with tales of a wayward steer that had led them on a chase through 3 neighboring properties. Sarah talked about her plans for the vegetable garden, and Matthew spoke of the cattle market in Denver. No one asked Violet difficult questions or pressed her about her past. It was only after the meal, when Pete and Sarah had retired to the bunkhouse, that Violet found herself alone with Matthew. They sat on the front porch, watching as the sky transformed into the spectacular canvas he had promised, streaks of orange and pink giving way to deep purple. "You were right about the sunset," Violet said, breaking the comfortable silence. Matthew nodded, his profile gilded by the fading light. "First time I saw it, I knew I wanted to stay here forever." "How did you meet Howard?" she asked, curious about the man who had changed Matthew's life so profoundly. Matthew was quiet for a long moment, and Violet wondered if she had overstepped. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured. "I was running with a gang. Nothing too serious at first, some cattle rustling, minor holdups. Then the leader, a man named Jeb Sullivan, decided to rob the bank in a town called Cottonwood." He paused, his fingers drumming restlessly on the arm of his chair. "I was supposed to be the lookout. Didn't even carry a gun, but something went wrong inside. Shots were fired. The sheriff was killed." Violet's breath caught in her throat. "Were you?" "I didn't pull the trigger," Matthew said quickly, "but I was there. Part of it. The others scattered and I panicked. Rode until my horse nearly collapsed. That's when I came across Howard's ranch." He looked at Violet directly now, his eyes somber in the gathering dusk. "He found me half dead from thirst at the edge of his property, took me in, nursed me back to health. When I was well enough to leave, he offered me a job instead." "He knew what you'd done," Matthew nodded. "I told him everything, expected him to turn me in. Instead, he said everybody deserves a chance to be better than their worst mistake." A small, sad smile touched his lips. "The gang was caught about a month later. Jeb and 2 others were hanged for the sheriff's murder. The rest got prison time." "And you?" Violet asked softly. "Howard rode with me to Cottonwood. I confessed to the new sheriff, told him everything I knew. Because I was just the lookout, and because I came forward voluntarily, they gave me 6 months in jail instead of the noose." His voice grew distant. "Howard visited every week, had a job waiting when I got out." The weight of his confession hung between them. Violet understood now why he had been so willing to believe in her innocence, to offer help without demanding proof of her character. "Thank you for telling me," she said at last. Matthew's gaze returned to the darkening sky. "Figured you should know who you're staying with. No secrets." "No secrets," Violet agreed, though her heart raced at the thought of revealing everything about her own past. Not lies exactly, but omissions that suddenly felt significant. "It's getting cold," Matthew observed, rising from his chair. "We should head in." Inside, he lit a lamp in the study-turned-bedroom and showed her where to find extra blankets. "I'm just upstairs if you need anything," he said, pausing at the door. "Sleep well, Violet." "Good night, Matthew," she replied, watching as he disappeared down the hallway. Alone again, Violet sat on the edge of the bed, her mind whirling with the day's events. From the brink of disaster to this peaceful haven in the span of hours, it seemed too fortunate to be real. Part of her kept expecting to wake and find herself back in Meadow Springs, facing the consequences of her father's actions. She opened her small bag and removed her mother's locket, the silver tarnished from years of wear. Inside was a miniature portrait of her parents on their wedding day, both young and smiling, unaware of the difficulties that lay ahead. "What would you think of me now, Mama?" she whispered, touching the tiny painted face. Her mother had died when Violet was just 12, leaving her alone with a father whose charm and ambition often outweighed his scruples. Edward Prescott had not been an evil man, just weak, perpetually convinced that the next scheme, the next town, would bring the fortune that eluded him. He had loved Violet in his way, teaching her to read and write, insisting she learn arithmetic so she could keep the books properly when we're rich. They never got rich. Instead, they moved from town to town across the West, staying just ahead of Edward's creditors and disappointed investors. Violet had grown up watching her father's pattern repeat itself: the initial welcome, the gradual suspicion, and finally, the hasty departure in the night. until Meadow Springs, where consumption had finally caught up with Edward Prescott, confining him to bed and forcing Violet to support them both with honest work for the first time. She had taken the job at the hotel, determined to put down roots at last, to make amends for her father's broken promises. For 6 months after his death, she had worked diligently, paying off small debts when she could. But then had come the accusation from Whittaker, $200 missing from the bank's safe, a sum Violet could never have repaid on her meager wages. The timing had been suspicious. The money had disappeared the day after she had publicly refused Whittaker's unwelcome advances. Violet closed the locket with a snap. There was no point dwelling on it now. Meadow Springs was behind her, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. She blew out the lamp and settled under the blankets, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft hooting of an owl, the creak of the house as it cooled in the evening air. Despite the strangeness of her surroundings, she felt safer than she had in months. Just before sleep claimed her, Violet realized she had not thought to ask Matthew how long she could stay. The question followed her into dreams filled with wide horizons and a pair of storm-gray eyes. Morning arrived with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee wafting under her door. Violet dressed quickly in her own clothes, which Sarah must have washed and returned while she slept. She found Matthew alone in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a mug. "Sarah's gone to gather eggs," he explained, offering her the steaming cup. "Pete's already out with the hands. Sleep all right. Better than I have in ages," Violet admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Thank you." Matthew nodded, leaning against the counter as he sipped from his own mug. "Thought I'd show you around the place today if you're feeling up to it." "I'd like that," Violet replied, suddenly eager to see more of this ranch that had become her unexpected sanctuary. After a breakfast of biscuits and gravy, they set out on foot. The morning was clear and cool, with a breeze that carried the scent of sage and sun-warmed earth. Matthew showed her the barn first, introducing her to the horses, his own chestnut gelding, Thunder, and a gentle mare named Daisy. "She's yours to ride while you're here," he said as Daisy nuzzled Violet's palm. "She'll take good care of you." "I'm not much of a horsewoman," Violet confessed, stroking the mare's velvety nose. "My father and I usually traveled by stage or train." "I can teach you," Matthew offered. "Can't get far in these parts without a horse." From the barn, they walked to the corrals, where several cowboys were breaking a spirited young Mustang. Violet watched in awe as the horse bucked and twisted, trying to dislodge its rider. "That's Carlos," Matthew explained, pointing to the man clinging to the Mustang's back. "Best bronc buster in 3 counties." The tour continued to the bunkhouse, where Sarah was preparing the midday meal for the ranch hands, and then to the vegetable garden, which was Sarah's pride and joy. Beyond that lay the chicken coop, a small orchard of apple trees, and finally, a clear stream that marked the eastern boundary of the property. "It's not the biggest spread," Matthew said as they sat on a fallen log beside the stream, "but it's good land. Howard chose well." "How many cattle do you run?" Violet asked, genuinely interested. The workings of a ranch were fascinating to her, so different from the towns she had known all her life. "About 500 head right now," Matthew replied, "hoping to double that in the next few years if the market holds steady." He looked at her curiously. "What about you? What did you do in Meadow Springs?" "I worked at the hotel," Violet said. "Cleaning rooms mostly, but sometimes helping in the kitchen or at the front desk." She hesitated, then added, "Before that, I traveled with my father. He was in sales, you could say." It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Edward Prescott had sold everything from patent medicines to mining shares, few of which had been worth the paper they were printed on. "And your mother?" Matthew asked gently. "She died when I was 12. "Fever," Matthew nodded, his expression sympathetic. "Mine passed when I was born, never knew her. My father raised me until I was 16, then a fall from a horse took him too." The shared understanding of loss created a bridge between them, and Violet found herself relaxing in his company. They spent the rest of the morning by the stream, talking easily about everything and nothing. Favorite books. He liked adventure tales, she preferred romances. Best meals they'd ever eaten, venison stew for him, apple pie for her, places they'd seen and places they hoped to visit someday. When the sun reached its zenith, they walked back to the ranch house for dinner. Sarah had prepared a hearty meal of ham, beans, and cornbread, which they ate at the kitchen table. "Matthew tells me you worked at a hotel," Sarah said as she poured Violet more lemonade. "You must be good with keeping things in order." "I try to be," Violet replied, uncertain where the conversation was heading. Sarah exchanged a look with Matthew. "Well, we've been thinking. Matthew's been needing someone to help with the accounts and correspondence. The ranch is growing, and neither of us has the time or the learning for it. If you're interested, that is." Violet's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. "You're offering me a job if you want it," Matthew confirmed. "Room and board plus wages. Nothing fancy but honest work." The opportunity was unexpected and almost too perfect. Violet had a good head for figures, one of the few useful skills her father had insisted she develop, and the position would allow her to stay at the ranch without feeling like a charity case. "I don't know what to say," she stammered. "I mean, yes, of course, I'd be very grateful for the opportunity." Sarah beamed. "Wonderful. We can set up a desk in the study, your room, I mean. No sense in moving you again when there's plenty of space." The afternoon passed in a flurry of activity as they rearranged the study to accommodate both a bed and a writing desk. Matthew brought in ledgers, correspondence, and stacks of receipts that had accumulated over months. "I've been putting this off for too long," he admitted, running a hand through his hair as he surveyed the piles. "Howard was always after me to keep better records." Violet picked up one of the ledgers, flipping through pages of hastily scrawled entries. "I can organize this," she said confidently. "It will take some time, but I can make sense of it." For the remainder of the day, she immersed herself in the task, sorting receipts by date and type, creating a system for cataloging correspondence, and beginning the painstaking process of bringing the ranch's financial records up to date. The work was satisfying, giving her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. When evening came, she joined Matthew on the porch again, watching another spectacular sunset paint the sky. "Thank you for the job," she said as darkness began to settle over the land. "It feels good to be useful." Matthew nodded, his profile limned in gold by the fading light. "You've got a good head for business. We need that around here." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, distant laughter from the bunkhouse, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods. "Can I ask you something?" Violet said finally, gathering her courage. "How long do you expect me to stay?" Matthew turned to look at her directly, his expression serious in the gathering dusk. "That depends on you. The job's yours for as long as you want it. This place can be your home if you choose to make it so. Home." The word resonated in Violet's chest like the clear note of a bell. A home of her own, not dependent on her father's schemes or fleeting goodwill of strangers. The possibility was almost too precious to contemplate. "I'd like that," she said softly. "To stay, I mean, at least for a while." Matthew's smile was warm enough to chase away the evening chill. "Good. The place feels better with you in it." The days that followed settled into a rhythm that Violet found both comfortable and energizing. Mornings were spent organizing the ranch's paperwork. Afternoons often included writing lessons with Matthew, and evenings brought shared meals and conversation on the porch. Each day, she grew more confident in her role and more certain that she had found where she belonged. The ranch hands, initially curious about her presence, soon accepted her as part of the household. Carlos, the bronc buster, tipped his hat whenever they passed. The cook, an old Mexican man everyone called Pappy, began leaving sweet treats by her ledger books. Even Pete, who had seemed the most reserved, warmed to her when she reorganized the supply ordering system, saving the ranch considerable money. Only one cloud shadowed Violet's growing contentment: the truth about her father remained untold. As the weeks passed and her friendship with Matthew deepened, the omission weighed more heavily on her conscience. He had shared his darkest moment with her. She owed him the same honesty. The opportunity came one evening in late May, nearly a month after her arrival at the ranch. A spring storm had rolled in, bringing much-needed rain but forcing everyone indoors. Matthew sat at the kitchen table, going over the breeding records Violet had organized while she mended a tear in one of his shirts. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly how natural it felt to sit with him like this, sharing the quiet evening tasks. In the flickering lamplight, she could study his face unobserved, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar above his right eyebrow, the way his forehead creased when he concentrated, when had her gratitude and friendship evolved into something deeper. The realization that she was falling in love with Matthew Grayson came not as a shock, but as a confirmation of something her heart had known for weeks. "Matthew," she began, setting aside her sewing, "there's something I need to tell you about my father." He looked up, his expression open and attentive. "I'm listening." Violet took a deep breath. "When I said he was in sales, that wasn't exactly complete. My father was what some might call a confidence man. He sold dreams, mining investments, miracle cures, business opportunities. None of them real." She waited for judgment to cloud his eyes, but Matthew simply nodded for her to continue. "We moved constantly, staying just ahead of the people he'd cheated. By the time I was old enough to understand what he was doing, it was too late to change anything. We were always running, always starting over." Her voice faltered. "I never participated in his schemes, but I didn't stop them either. I just survived." "You were a child," Matthew said quietly, "not your responsibility." "But I'm not a child anymore," Violet countered. "In Meadow Springs, after he died, I tried to make amends. Worked honest jobs, paid back what I could. That's why Mr. Whittaker's accusation hurt so much. I was finally doing the right thing, and no one believed me." She looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap. "I should have told you all this when we met. You had a right to know who you were bringing into your home." The silence that followed seemed endless. When Violet finally gathered the courage to look up, she found Matthew watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "My mother," he said slowly, "the one I never knew, she was a con artist too, took my father for nearly everything he had before she died giving birth to me." A sad smile touched his lips. "He never held it against me, said I was the one honest thing she ever gave him." Violet stared at him, speechless at this unexpected revelation. "We don't get to choose our parents," Matthew continued, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. "Only who we become in spite of them." Relief washed through her, so powerful that tears sprang to her eyes. "You're not angry. Why would I be? You're not your father, Violet. You're the woman who spent weeks untangling my mess of accounts, who treats Sarah like family, who still flinches when Pete fires his rifle but insists on learning to shoot anyway." His grip on her hand tightened. "You're the woman I've come to care for very deeply." The admission hung in the air between them, as honest and unadorned as everything else about Matthew Grayson. Violet's heart raced as she turned her hand to intertwine her fingers with his. "I care for you too," she whispered. "More than I thought possible." The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows, but inside the kitchen, a different kind of energy crackled in the air. Matthew stood, drawing Violet to her feet and into his arms. His embrace was gentle, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but the last thing Violet wanted was distance. When his lips met hers, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. The kiss was tender at first, then deepening as she responded with equal fervor. His hands cradled her face as if she were something precious, and in that moment, Violet believed she might be. A particularly loud crack of thunder broke them apart, both breathless and slightly dazed. Matthew's smile was radiant in the lamplight. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he confessed, his thumbs tracing the curve of her cheekbones. "Why didn't you?" Violet asked, her hands resting against the solid warmth of his chest. "Wasn't sure you felt the same, didn't want to rush you." His expression grew serious. "You've had enough people trying to take advantage of you. I wanted to be different." The simple statement, so typical of his straightforward honesty, made Violet love him all the more. She raised herself on tiptoe to kiss him again, pouring all her newfound certainty into the gesture. "You are different," she assured him when they parted. "You're the man who saw me as more than my father's daughter, who offered to carry my burdens when everyone else just added to them." Matthew's arms tightened around her waist. "I meant what I said that first day, Violet. I'll carry you as long as you'll let me." The storm eventually passed, but the change in their relationship remained, as clear and refreshing as the washed sky that followed the rain. They didn't make a formal announcement, but the way Matthew's hand sought hers during evening gatherings, the lingering glances they exchanged over breakfast, told the story plainly enough. Sarah was delighted, Pete approving, and the ranch hands exchanged knowing looks when Matthew began taking more meals at the main house instead of with the crew. June arrived with long, sun-drenched days and work that kept everyone busy from dawn until dusk. The cattle needed moving to summer pastures, fences required mending, and preparations began for the fall roundup and drive to market. Violet's role expanded beyond bookkeeping. She took over correspondence with buyers and suppliers, freeing Matthew to focus on the practical aspects of running the ranch. Her riding improved under his patient tutelage, and soon she was accompanying him on short trips to check on the herd or survey the property. It was on one such ride, nearly 2 months after her arrival at the ranch, that Matthew brought her to a spot she hadn't seen before, a small rise overlooking a meadow where wildflowers painted the grass in swaths of blue, yellow, and purple. "This is beautiful," Violet exclaimed as they dismounted. "How have I never been here? It's a bit out of the way," Matthew replied, spreading a blanket on the ground. "Howard used to bring his wife here for picnics, said it was the prettiest spot on the whole ranch." They sat side by side, sharing a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples that Sarah had packed. The summer breeze carried the scent of grass and flowers, and overhead, hawks circled lazily in the vast blue sky. "I've been thinking," Matthew said after they had eaten, his voice unusually hesitant. "About the future, our future specifically." Violet's heart skipped a beat. "Oh," he took her hand, his palm warm against hers. "I know it hasn't been long, just a couple of months since you came here. Maybe this is too soon, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." From his pocket, he withdrew a small object, a ring, simple but beautiful, with a modestly sized pearl set in silver. "It was Howard's wife's," he explained, his eyes never leaving Violet's face. "He left it to me, said I should give it to the woman who made this place feel like home again." Violet's free hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes as Matthew continued. "You're that woman, Violet. You've brought life and light back to this ranch to me. I love you. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." For a moment, Violet couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion in his words and in her own heart. This man, who had seen her at her lowest point and offered his hand instead of judgment, who had given her purpose and belonging when she had nothing, he was offering her forever. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Matthew, I'll marry you." His smile could have outshone the sun as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. When he kissed her, Violet felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. "I love you," she said against his lips, the words she had held back for weeks finally finding voice. "I love you so much." They lingered in the meadow for hours, talking of the future they would build together, children they hoped for, improvements to the ranch, dreams they had set aside and now dared to resurrect. When they finally rode back, the setting sun gilding the landscape in gold, Violet felt as though she were returning to the ranch as a different woman than the one who had left that morning. Sarah's joyful tears and Pete's hearty congratulations made the evening a celebration. News traveled quickly to the bunkhouse, and soon the hands were offering their good wishes as well. Carlos produced a guitar, and someone broke out a bottle of whiskey saved for special occasions. The night air filled with music and laughter as an impromptu engagement party took shape in the ranch yard. Watching Matthew accept congratulatory slaps on the back, his face alight with happiness, Violet marveled at how thoroughly her life had changed in just 2 months. From a desperate flight from Meadow Springs to this moment of pure joy, it seemed almost like a dream. "He's a good man," Sarah said, coming to stand beside her. "And you're good for him. I haven't seen him this happy since, well, ever." "He's good for me too," Violet replied, touching the pearl ring that now adorned her finger. "I never thought I'd find someone who could look past my family's reputation and see me." Sarah squeezed her hand. "That's what love does, my dear, sees what others miss." The wedding was set for September, after the fall roundup. Violet threw herself into preparations, wanting everything to be perfect for the day she would officially become Mrs. Matthew Grayson. Sarah helped her sew a wedding dress of cream-colored cotton with lace trim ordered specially from Denver. Pete rode to the neighboring ranches to deliver invitations, and Matthew built a proper wedding arch to stand beneath. August brought scorching heat and the first signs of trouble. It began with a rider arriving at dusk, his horse lathered from hard travel. Violet was in the kitchen with Sarah when they heard the commotion in the yard. "Matthew Grayson here?" the stranger was asking as they stepped onto the porch. Matthew emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm Grayson. What can I do for you?" the rider dismounted, revealing a star pinned to his vest. "Sheriff Tom Wilson from Meadow Springs, looking for a woman named Violet Prescott. Heard she might be in these parts." Violet froze, her blood turning to ice. Matthew's expression remained neutral, but she saw his shoulders tense. "What business do you have with Miss Prescott?" he asked, his voice carefully measured. The sheriff mopped his brow with a bandana. "She's wanted for questioning in connection with a theft." $200 from the Meadow Springs Bank. Before Matthew could respond, Violet stepped forward, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. "I'm Violet Prescott, Sheriff, but I didn't steal any money." Wilson studied her with tired eyes. "Madam, I'm just here to bring you back for questioning." Mr. Whittaker was quite insistent. "Whittaker," Matthew repeated, moving to stand beside Violet. The bank manager who shot at her, the sheriff, had the grace to look uncomfortable. "There was some trouble, yes. But he's pressing charges now, says he has evidence." "What evidence?" Violet demanded, her fear giving way to indignation. "I never took a penny that wasn't mine." "That's for a judge to decide," Wilson replied. "I'm afraid you'll need to come with me, Miss Prescott." Matthew's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "She's not going anywhere tonight, Sheriff. It's nearly dark and the trail's dangerous. You're welcome to stay in the bunkhouse and we can discuss this in the morning." Wilson hesitated, then nodded. "Fair enough. But I'll be taking her back to Meadow Springs tomorrow, one way or another." After the sheriff had been escorted to the bunkhouse, Matthew led Violet inside, his expression grave. "Tell me everything about this Whittaker," he said as they sat at the kitchen table. "Every detail you can remember." Violet recounted her interactions with the bank manager, his increasing attention after her father's death, his thinly veiled propositions, her public rejection of his advances, and the theft accusation that had followed just days later. "He claimed I had access to the safe because I sometimes delivered the hotel's daily receipts," she explained. "But I was never alone in the bank, never had the combination. It's absurd." Matthew listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I believe you," he said finally. "But Whittaker sounds like a man with influence in Meadow Springs. Going back there could be dangerous." "I don't have a choice," Violet replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "If I run again, it only makes me look guilty." "There's always a choice." Matthew stood abruptly. "I need to speak with Pete. Stay here." He returned an hour later, his expression determined. "Pete's riding to Cottonwood tonight," he announced. "There's a lawyer there who helped me once, name's James Bennett. If anyone can get to the bottom of this, it's him." "A lawyer costs money," Violet protested. "And Cottonwood's 2 days' ride from here. Pete will make it by dawn if he changes horses at the Johnson place," Matthew replied. "And don't worry about the cost. You're going to be my wife, Violet. What's mine is yours." The simple declaration brought tears to her eyes. No one had ever stood by her this way, ready to fight battles she had always faced alone. What if Bennett can't help? She asked, voicing the fear that gnawed at her. "What if they believe Whittaker?" Matthew took her face in his hands, his eyes intense with conviction. "Then we'll face it together. I'm not letting you carry this burden alone, Violet. Not now, not ever." Morning brought Sheriff Wilson to the main house, hat in hand but determination in his stance. "Time to go, Miss Prescott," he said after declining Sarah's offer of breakfast. Violet, who had barely slept, nodded resignedly. She had packed a small bag and donned her most respectable dress, hoping to make a favorable impression when they reached Meadow Springs. "I'm coming with her," Matthew stated, his tone brooking no argument. Wilson frowned. "That's not necessary, Mr. Grayson. It's not a request, Sheriff. Miss Prescott is my fiancée. Where she goes, I go." The sheriff looked between them, noting their clasped hands and matching expressions of resolve. "Suit yourself," he said finally, "but we leave now. It's a long ride." The journey to Meadow Springs took a full day, with brief stops to rest the horses and eat the provisions Sarah had packed. Violet's anxiety grew with each passing mile, memories of her hasty flight replaying in her mind. What would they find when they returned? Would anyone speak in her defense? Or would the town's opinion of her father color their judgment of her? It was late afternoon when they crested the final hill and Meadow Springs, came into view a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley, surrounded by farms and the distant mountains. The sight of it made Violet's stomach clench. "It'll be all right," Matthew murmured, riding close beside her. "I'm right here." The main street was much as she remembered at the hotel where she had worked, the general store, the saloon, and at the far end, the imposing brick building that housed the Meadow Springs Bank. People stopped to stare as Sheriff Wilson led them through town, whispers following in their wake. They dismounted in front of the jail, a small building adjacent to the sheriff's office. Wilson gestured for them to enter, his expression apologetic. "I'll need to lock you up for the night, Miss Prescott," he explained. "Judge won't be available until morning." Matthew stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "She's not spending the night in a cell, Sheriff. She's not a criminal." "It's standard procedure, I'll vouch for her," came a new voice from behind them. Violet turned to find Mrs. Henderson, the hotel owner, standing in the doorway. The older woman's face was lined with concern. "I'll take responsibility for Miss Prescott," Mrs. Henderson continued, addressing the sheriff directly. "She can stay at the hotel under my supervision until the hearing." Wilson hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the respect commanded by one of the town's most prominent citizens. "I don't know, Martha." "Oh, for heaven's sake, Tom," Mrs. Henderson interrupted. "The girl worked for me for months. She's not going to flee in the night, especially not with her young man watching over her." She fixed Matthew with an appraising look. "You are staying at the hotel too, I presume?" "Yes, madam," Matthew replied, relief evident in his voice. "And thank you," the sheriff sighed, outnumbered. "Fine. But you're responsible if she disappears, Martha, and I'll need to see you both at my office first thing tomorrow." Mrs. Henderson nodded briskly, then gestured for Violet and Matthew to follow her. As they walked toward the hotel, she spoke in a low voice. "I never believed you took that money, Violet. Whittaker's been acting strange ever since you left, nervous, short-tempered. Something's not right there." Hope flickered in Violet's chest. "You believe me?" "Of course I do," Mrs. Henderson replied, patting her arm. "You're many things, my dear, but a thief isn't one of them. Now come along, you both look exhausted, and tomorrow will be challenging enough without adding fatigue to your troubles." The hotel room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the main street. Mrs. Henderson arranged for Matthew to stay in the adjoining room, leaving the connecting door unlocked for propriety's sake, but convenience too. Once they were alone, Violet sank onto the bed, the emotional strain of the day finally catching up with her. "I can't believe Mrs. Henderson stood up for me like that." Matthew sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "People recognize honesty when they see it, Violet, and you've got an honest heart." "I'm scared," she admitted, leaning into his strength. "What if Bennett doesn't arrive in time? What if the judge sides with Whittaker?" "Then we'll appeal," Matthew said simply. "We'll fight until the truth comes out, I promise you that." His certainty was a balm to her frayed nerves. For the first time since seeing the sheriff at the ranch, Violet allowed herself to believe that things might turn out all right. Morning came too quickly. They breakfasted with Mrs. Henderson, who provided them with information about Judge Phillips' fair-minded, but doesn't suffer fools, and offered to accompany them to the hearing. By 9 o'clock, they were seated in the small courtroom at the back of the sheriff's office, waiting for proceedings to begin. Gerald Whittaker arrived flanked by two men Violet recognized as bank employees. He glared at her from across the room, his florid face set in lines of determination. The sight of him rekindled all her anxiety. Judge Phillips, a stern-looking man with iron-gray hair and spectacles, called the room to order. "This is a preliminary hearing in the matter of alleged theft from the Meadow Springs Bank," he announced. "Mr. Whittaker, please state your accusation." Whittaker rose, straightening his waistcoat with self-importance. "Your Honor, approximately 3 months ago, the sum of $200 went missing from the bank's safe. As manager, I conducted a thorough investigation and determined that Miss Prescott had both opportunity and motive to commit the theft." "And what evidence supports this conclusion?" the judge inquired. "Miss Prescott regularly delivered deposits from the hotel," Whittaker replied. "She was often in the bank around closing time when fewer staff were present. Additionally, her father left substantial debts that she could not hope to repay on her hotel wages. It sounded damning when presented that way, and Violet felt a chill run through her. Matthew's hand found hers beneath the table, offering silent support. Furthermore, Whittaker continued, his voice taking on a righteous tone, when confronted about the missing funds, Miss Prescott fled town, clear evidence of guilt. "I believe," came a new voice from the doorway, "that there are some facts missing from Mr. Whittaker's account." All heads turned to see a distinguished-looking man in a well-tailored suit standing at the entrance. Beside him was Pete, dusty from the trail but wearing a satisfied expression. "James Bennett, Your Honor," the newcomer announced, striding forward. Attorney at law representing Miss Prescott, relief flooded through Violet. Bennett had arrived, and just in time. "Approach, Mr. Bennett," Judge Phillips instructed. "Are you prepared to proceed immediately, or do you require time to consult with your client?" "I'm prepared, Your Honor," Bennett replied confidently. "My associate, Mr. Sanders, has provided me with the relevant details, and I've had the opportunity to investigate certain matters in Cottonwood that bear directly on this case." The judge nodded, gesturing for him to continue. Bennett turned to face Whittaker, his expression polite but determined. "Mr. Whittaker, you claim that Miss Prescott had opportunity to access the bank's safe. However, I've spoken with your teller, Mr. Davis, who confirms that no one outside bank personnel knows the combination." "Is that correct?" Whittaker shifted uncomfortably. "Generally, yes, and is it not true," Bennett pressed, "that the safe is located in your private office, which remains locked when you're not present?" "Yes, but so Miss Prescott would have needed both the key to your office and the combination to the safe, neither of which she possessed." "Correct." Whittaker's face had grown increasingly red. "She could have observed me opening it or stolen the key temporarily." Bennett smiled thinly. "Interesting theories. Now, regarding Miss Prescott's alleged flight from town, I understand there was an incident involving you firing a pistol at her in public. Sheriff Wilson, can you confirm this?" Wilson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "There was a disturbance, yes." "Mr. Whittaker discharged his weapon after an argument with Miss Prescott." "An argument about what exactly?" Bennett inquired. Before Wilson could answer, Mrs. Henderson rose from her seat. "If I may, Your Honor, I witnessed the incident." Mr. Whittaker had been making unwelcome advances toward Violet for weeks. When she refused him again, publicly, he became enraged. The next day, he accused her of theft. Murmurs ran through the small crowd gathered in the courtroom. Judge Phillips banged his gavel for silence. "Is this true, Mr. Whittaker?" he demanded. "Absolutely not," Whittaker blustered. "This is a fabrication to distract from her guilt." Bennett withdrew a folded paper from his briefcase. "Your Honor, I have here a sworn statement from Miss Prescott's former colleague at the hotel, Miss Susan Taylor, corroborating Mrs. Henderson's account of Mr. Whittaker's behavior." As the judge examined the document, Bennett continued, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "But perhaps most interesting is what I discovered in Cottonwood. Mr. Whittaker recently purchased a significant parcel of land that cost precisely $200. The room fell silent as the implication settled. Whittaker's face had drained of color. That's a coincidence," he stammered. "I've been saving for years." "Indeed," Bennett produced another document. "According to the bank's own records, which Mr. Davis was kind enough to share, you withdrew exactly $200 from your personal account the day before reporting the theft. An interesting coincidence indeed." Judge Phillips studied the paper, his expression grave. "Mr. Whittaker, these are serious inconsistencies in your account." "It's all lies," Whittaker protested, but his voice had lost its conviction. "The girl is a thief, just like her father." "Your Honor," Bennett said calmly, "I submit that the evidence points not to Miss Prescott's guilt, but to Mr. Whittaker's attempt to frame her after she rejected his advances using the bank's money to purchase property in Cottonwood, then blaming the loss on her." The judge considered this for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Finally, he spoke. "Based on the evidence presented, I find insufficient cause to proceed with charges against Miss Prescott." He turned a stern gaze toward Whittaker. "However, I am ordering an immediate audit of the Meadow Springs Bank's accounts to be conducted by an independent examiner from Denver." Sheriff Wilson, please ensure that Mr. Whittaker remains available for further questioning. Relief washed over Violet in a dizzying wave. Beside her, Matthew squeezed her hand so tightly it almost hurt, but she welcomed the pain as confirmation that this was real. She was free, her name cleared. As the courtroom began to empty, Bennett approached them, extending his hand to Matthew. Good to see you again, Grayson. Your foreman rode hard to reach me. I can't thank you enough, James, Matthew replied, shaking his hand vigorously. You saved the day just like last time. Bennett smiled, turning to Violet. Miss Prescott, it was my pleasure to represent you. And may I offer my congratulations on your engagement. Matthew is a fine man. The best man I know, Violet agreed, her voice thick with emotion. How can we ever repay you? Consider it a wedding gift, Bennett replied with a wink. Though I do expect an invitation to the ceremony. Outside the courthouse, the bright September sun seemed to mirror Violet's mood, radiant, hopeful, full of promise. Mrs. Henderson hugged her tightly, whispering apologies for not standing up to Whittaker sooner. Pete announced that he would ride ahead to bring the good news to Sarah and the ranch hands. What now? Matthew asked as they stood alone in the street, the future suddenly wide open before them. Violet looked up at the man who had risked everything to stand by her, who had believed in her when belief was in short supply. Now, she said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, we go home. We have a wedding to finish planning. The wedding took place exactly as they had planned, on a perfect autumn day when the leaves were turning gold and crimson. The entire ranch gathered in the meadow where Matthew had proposed, joined by friends from neighboring spreads and even a few people from Meadow Springs, including Mrs. Henderson. Violet wore her cream-colored dress with wildflowers in her hair, and Matthew looked impossibly handsome in a new suit ordered from Denver. Pete stood as Matthew's best man, while Sarah, beaming with motherly pride, gave Violet away. James Bennett, true to his word, had ridden from Cottonwood for the occasion. He brought news that Gerald Whittaker had been indicted for embezzlement following the bank audit, confirming what they had suspected all along. Under the arch Matthew had built with his own hands, they exchanged vows that were simple but profound promises to love, honor, and support each other through whatever life might bring. When Matthew placed a gold band beside the pearl engagement ring on Violet's finger, his hands were as steady as his voice. I take you, Violet, as my wife, he said, loud enough for all to hear, and I promise to carry your burdens as my own from this day until my last. Violet's response came from the depths of her heart. And I take you, Matthew, as my husband, promising to share both your joys and your sorrows, to be your partner in all things, for as long as we both shall live. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, a feast prepared by Sarah and Pappy, music provided by Carlos and his guitar, dancing under stars that seemed to have been polished especially for the occasion. As Matthew whirled her around the makeshift dance floor, Violet marveled at how completely her life had transformed in the span of just 5 months. Happy? Matthew asked, holding her close as the music slowed. More than I ever thought possible, she replied, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for letting me, he answered simply. For trusting me with your heart when you had every reason to guard it. Later that night, alone in the main house that was now truly their home, they spoke of the future children they hoped for, the ranch they would build together, the life they would create. Outside, the autumn wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. They called me a burden, Violet mused, nestled in her husband's arms. And now here I am, the wife of a rancher, keeping his books and sharing his bed. Matthew's laugh rumbled beneath her ear. You're many things, Violet Grayson, but a burden has never been one of them. You're my strength, my partner, my heart. And you, she replied, raising her face for his kiss, are the man who promised to carry me forever. I intend to hold you to that promise. It's the easiest vow I'll ever keep, Matthew assured her, drawing her closer, for the rest of our days. 5 years later, on a warm spring morning much like the one when they first met, Matthew and Violet stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching their 3-year-old daughter, Emily, chase butterflies in the yard. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. The herd had doubled, as Matthew had hoped. The house had grown to accommodate their family, and Violet's careful management of the finances had allowed them to purchase additional grazing land from a neighboring spread. "Look, Mama," Emily called, her dark curls bouncing as she ran toward them with cupped hands. "I caught one." Violet knelt to admire the butterfly gently cradled in her daughter's small palms. "It's beautiful, sweetheart, but remember what we said about wild things. They need to be free," Emily recited solemnly before opening her hands to release her captive. She watched with wonder as the butterfly fluttered away, its wings catching the morning light. Matthew rested his hand on Violet's shoulder, his touch conveying all the love that had only deepened with the passing years. "She's got your kind heart," he observed proudly. "And your determination," Violet replied, smiling as their daughter immediately set off in pursuit of another butterfly. "Heaven help us when the new one arrives." Her hand moved instinctively to her rounded belly where their second child grew. Matthew covered her hand with his expression one of wonder and gratitude. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed, not for the first time. "That night I found you at the edge of town, running from trouble. It was the luckiest day of my life." Violet rose to face him, her eyes reflecting the same love and certainty she had felt on their wedding day. "Not luck," she corrected gently. "Destiny. We were meant to find each other, Matthew. To carry each other's burdens and share each other's joys." As Emily's laughter rang out across the ranch yard and the morning sun bathed them in its golden light, Violet knew that the words Matthew had spoken on that fateful day had been more than just comfort to a frightened young woman. They had been a promise that he had kept with unwavering devotion to carry her through life's challenges, to share her triumphs, to build a future where neither of them would ever have to stand alone again. They had found in each other not a burden to be endured, but a blessing to be cherished. And in that blessing, they had discovered the true meaning of home.